Stephen Thompson, conseiller politique stratégique auprès d'organismes et d'établissements de la société civile, défend les intérêts de la minorité anglophone du Canada. Fort de ses 15 années d'expérience en tant que directeur des politiques, de la recherche et des affaires publiques du Quebec Community Groups Network, il continue de défendre avec éloquence les droits linguistiques des minorités. Avocat chevronné, il participe fréquemment à des comités parlementaires et à des forums publics, ce qui illustre son fort attachement à l'essor de la communauté anglophone du Québec. M. Thompson est titulaire d'un diplôme du Collège militaire royal du Canada, d'un diplôme d'études supérieures de l'Université d'Exeter et d'une maîtrise en droit de la Osgoode Hall Law School, avec une présentation, je pense, qui a changé de titre, Retour aux sources, l'article 23 et la communauté anglophone du.
Oui, merci Stéphanie. It's true, I changed my mind. I got so interested in some other stuff. I've been doing some really neat work for Guy Rogers, whose movie, What We Choose to Remember. If you haven't seen it, please see it. And Guy is writing an accompanying book to that. I'm doing some demographic work for him, going back to 1867. And it's fascinating because what does Anglo-Quebec mean, right? What does English Quebecer mean in 1867 compared to now? And you know, if you call an Irishman an English person in the 19th, even today, Patrick's looking at me like he's coming at me in a minute. So it's been a fascinating journey, and that got me thinking about identity, and that got me thinking about how we define ourselves. Because one of the words that everybody I think has used here today, and everybody will use for the rest of the day, is community. And that word is not defined in law. Nobody knows what that means legally. We know what it might include, but we don't know what it means. The other terms that aren't defined, and people use them all the time, the English-speaking Quebecer. Nobody knows what that means. Individual groups know what that means, but nobody has sat down with a common definition of that. Why is that important? Because the community has not defined itself. Who's defining us? Who's defining the English minority in Quebec? The courts and the government. Is that really who you want defining the English-speaking community? And I shall begin. Better not, like my friend Dave, and start to stray. In November 2023, I made a presentation to QUESCREN's Education Vitality Forum entitled English-Speaking Quebec and Minority Language Rights, a Lost Opportunity. And I'd just like to thank Lorraine and Brian and QUESCREN for creating these spaces where we can talk about these things objectively and academically, and I think, and calmly, and bring different voices together. I think it's super important. My talk at that time was a call to action for parental engagement with the Section 23 minority language education rights, which this presentation will update with the benefit of new data from Census 21. And we'll also offer some constructive advice for the leaders of the English education system in Quebec, who are the duty bearers for the Section 23 right. Terminology there, a duty bearer, if you have a right, who has the duty to help you fulfill that right, a duty bearer. We tend to think of that in terms of the provincial or federal government. It's also the school boards, which is another level of government. They're duty bearers. They don't hold any rights. School boards hold no rights. They exercise the rights that belong to the right holders, the parents, right? I will conclude with an opportunity presented by the Quebec Court of Appeal's recent decision in the Bill 40 case. This is the style of cause. If you don't know anything about Section 23, this is the case to read. It's very well written. It's clearly written. Everything you need to know is in here. A lot of folks have talked about Mahi today. That's one of about 20 cases on Section 23. This brings it all together in a really very clearly written, easy to understand way. So there's your solid percent. By this point of the day, we should be familiar with the Section 23 right. It's a positive right, which means governments have to do something to make this happen. And I'll just bring your attention to point number 3 there. There are equivalent in quality to those of the majority. Or sorry, that's okay, never mind. I'll just bring, so the educational experience in the minority education school has to be of equivalent to that of the majority. So if you have an, I don't know, special needs child and there are services available in the French school behind you that aren't available in your English school, that's a section 23 violation. It obviously costs a little more to have a minority school system for that reason. So the federal government kicks in some money. To put this in perspective though, in 2022-2023, PCH, Department of Canadian Heritage, gave $50 million to Quebec for the minority school system, the English system. The budget for the English Montreal School Board, 1 out of 9, that year was $450 million. So we should put these things in perspective a little bit. The duty that the government, the duty bearer here at the government level is the provincial government, which is why governments push back against these rights, because they're the ones that have to pay for them. It's not the feds that have to pay for them, it's the provinces that have to pay them. All right, also, look on the bottom there. This is about the management control rate, the establishment of educational programs. I'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, my 2023 presentation. Oops. My 2023 presentation noted that unlike Francophone counterparts in the rest of Canada, Section 23 litigation to protect these rights in Quebec has been left exclusively to the English school boards. So some of the main cases of Section 23 are parents suing Francophone school boards. Rose Deva, right? Arsenal Cameron. These are parents suing for their rights, not in Quebec, it's never happened. Parents have not mobilized to protect these rights in the courts from action or inaction by government or by the school boards. With notable individual exceptions, parents do not seem to be knowledgeable or engaged with Section 23. I'm going to tell you 3 stories, personal stories. My son completed secondary 3 math without a textbook. We were waiting for the English translation of the French language resource. This was not an educational experience equivalent in quality to that of the majority, and was probably a Section 23 violation. Richelieu Valley High School in McMasterville ceased operations in 2003, merging with McDonald Cartier High School in St. Hubert to form Heritage Regional High School in Longueuil. My son was a student at RVR during this period. Midway through the school year, students were moved from RVR to a temporary location in Longueuil because the renovations at Heritage hadn't been completed, and because $15 million in upgrades were needed to repurpose the RVR building for use by the Commission Scolaire de Patrie. His commute tripled, and he ended up in 3 different schools over 12 months. This disruption, triggered by decisions made by the Riverside School Board and the Commission Scolaire de Patrie, likely violated Section 23. Third, in the early 2000s, Quebec's revised history curriculum generated significant controversy. Critics argued it promoted a nationalist, Quebec-centric narrative, emphasizing French-Canadian survival and minimizing the role of minorities, particularly English-speaking Quebecers and Indigenous peoples. Section 23 obliges English school boards to deliver instruction that reflects and reinforces the cultural identity of the English-speaking community. The duty is held by the school boards, not the province. Imposing a program of study that fails to do so may constitute a violation of Section 23 by both the ministry and the English school boards. Potential violations of Section 23 rights beyond those affecting the continued existence of elected school boards and their management functions are rarely challenged in Quebec. The core conclusion is that English-speaking Quebec is not fully benefiting from the Section 23 rights. not only due to provincial action, but also because of its own inaction, the inaction of the community and the inaction of the school boards. There is no established culture of parents demanding accountability to their Section 23 rights from government and school board duty holders when the rights are infringed. The key to full enjoyment of Section 23 in Quebec is parental engagement. If the right holders do not engage, what future does the right have? The recent Quebec Court of Appeal victory for the English school boards was focused on management control aspects of the right and who could vote in an election for school commissioners. It came on the heels of last November's school board elections. There were 98 seats open in that election, 70 of which were acclaimed. The average voter turnout for the 19 commissioners and chairs who were elected was 13.6%. It ranged from 4.3% to 24.9%. What are we fighting for? Elected school commissioners. I'm not suggesting the fight against Bill 40 was not necessary. I do, however, wonder how as a community, we can move beyond thinking of Section 23 only in terms of elected school boards. How can right holders be meaningfully engaged across the full scope of the rights guaranteed by Section 23? And how can we better understand that school boards are not themselves right holders, but rather duty bearers, institutions charged with fulfilling these constitutional obligations in all aspects of their mandates? I want to stay with this idea of parental mobilization around Section 23 rights for another reason. Despite its constitutional entitlements to equal quality education, covering everything from facilities and programming to travel time and special needs services, a significant proportion of eligible parents are choosing to send their children to the French system. In 2021, there were 228,510 children born between 2003 and 2015 who were eligible for instruction in English in Quebec under the Section 23 right. This is the table from StatsCan. We'll get back to some of these figures in a minute. In the 2021, in the same school year, there were 83,000 children in attendance across English school systems in Quebec. Only 66% of parents of preschool age children intend to enroll their children in an English elementary school. That's from the post-census survey. That's again. For years, education leaders have been calling on Quebec to accede to the 23(1)(a) of the charter. That's the mother tongue there. Allowing minority language educational rights to extend to citizens whose mother tongue is English. That, it was argued, would provide oxygen to a dwindling English system. As it turns out, the English system in Quebec does not have a market problem, it has a marketing problem. And its leaders should ask more marketing questions. Who is the customer? What does the customer value? How do we reach the customer? How do we differentiate ourselves from the majority system? How do we measure success? Here's a good place to start. This is also from the post-census survey. I'd like to finish with a word on community. As a policy person with an interest in law, I like words and concepts that are well defined. The word community is not started with this. The Quebec Court of Appeal Bill 40 decision opens the door for a real discussion on defining the English-speaking community of Quebec. With respect, choosing the representatives who exercise management and control rights, the court said that in Quebec, this linguistic minority includes at least Canadian citizens whose first language, whose mother tongue is English, who have received their primary level of English in Canada, their primary school in English in Canada, and who have another child who received or is receiving primary school in Canada. So A, 1A, 1B, and there you go. So for example, American or UK immigrant to Quebec can now run and vote in a school board election. not as broad a definition as that used by the Quebec Community Groups Network, for example. It still uses first official language spoken English data, but we're getting on a path to convergence. But I want to point out that the two communities are not together. The definitions are not the same. Quebec's English education community is not the same as the English-speaking community of Quebec when groups like the Quebec Community Groups Network talk about it. They're two different beasts. Why? Oh, I took that out. That was weird. Oh, no, here we go. I've always known, I got 5 minutes. I've always known that there were a lot of francophones in the English system in Quebec. I've always known this, and I've often wondered about this, what the effects on it. Lorraine and I, when we were in Acfas in Chicoutimi 2 years ago, we were at Arvida, the Arvida High School, population 138 kids, 8 of them were Anglophones, right? 43% of the school English school population off the island of Montreal, mother tongue francophones. And I've always thought, we're obviously an outlier. No, thank God for StatsCan, who produce language variables with the Section 23 eligibility data. Nobody's talked about this yet, and it's fascinating. Only one province in Canada has the majority of Section 23 kids who are minority language mother tongue. That's New Brunswick. Quebec, we're about on par. 42% are francophone in the English system, and 44% are anglophones. In the rest of Canada, the mean mother tongue of Section 23 eligible children is 65% majority language. 80% of the kids who have a Section 23 eligibility in Newfoundland are mother tongue anglophones. Nobody's talked about this. Nobody's understood and started to think, well, I started to think, but we should start to think what this means in terms of the Section 23 right, whose dual purpose is language and culture. Who exactly's culture are we trying to keep with the Section 23 right if the majority of the kids in the classroom are from the majority? My brain just keeps. And why this is important, I think, for the community to get together and come up with a definition for itself. As I said in the beginning, if you don't provide sovereignty for your country, somebody else will for you. If we don't define ourselves, somebody else will. So, the Charter of the French language right now. Public bodies communicate in a language other than French. With whom? What's one of the exceptions? With people who are eligible to attend school in English. 42% of those people are francophones. And this is how the government of Quebec is gonna, I mean, it's not the government of Quebec's fault. Don't blame the government of Quebec. The community is not telling them what they want, how they want to be defined. A lot of times we're just waiting for the government of Quebec to say something so we can say they're bad or they're doing, but we're not giving them anything to work with. And I'll leave you at that. Thanks.